Daniel started his career and his education having a medical degree in Switzerland, and then, as many talented people, he went and got the best out of America by studying at Harvard Business School, which contributed to his successes. And if I had to highlight some of the things, of course, he did, this would be Sandoz. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That's the way they
absolutely correct. Yeah.
In Russia, and then when Sandoz merged with another company to become what now is Novartis, what I particularly liked about the merger is not necessarily the corporate proceedings, because I'm not an economist and I cannot evaluate the success or the perfection with which it was made. But I can evaluate one thing. This university has many philologists, meaning people who study languages, and the name Novartis was invented by Daniel himself as a merger of two words, right?
The truth is always in between.
Anyway, naming a new child is always an issue, as any parent knows. Naming something which will change the life of Europe is even more important. So I think today the talk of Dr. Vassella will be not necessarily about naming new realities, but he will reflect on current trends in health in Europe and Russia, and will tell us about what it entails to the populations here and there, the companies and the publics. And without further ado, I leave the floor to Mr. Vassella.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My father was a professor of history at the University of Fribourg in Switzerland, a small university. And as a kid, he often took me to the university. While he was giving a lecture, I was playing outside and waiting until he was finished. And he liked to talk with the students a lot, and sometimes way too long for me, so I tried to pull him away. And so universities and academic centers have a very special emotional relationship for me, in a way intimidating and in a way very familiar, and it's a very special pleasure and honor to be here, and thank you very much for your invitation, Oleg. Oleg warned me that my talk will maybe be too long, so I will be watching your faces, and he will kick me under the table if it becomes too expensive. But let me do the following. I thought I will first talk about healthcare and some trends, also about Russia, and then briefly coming to innovation and the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, I have to talk about the pharmaceutical industry. I cannot avoid that. But I'm also proud of it, and I think we are doing a good job. And then last but not least, I'll share a few thoughts about leadership, which has been a theme which has given me more time to pause in the recent 2 years as I have stepped down as CEO. Why does healthcare matter? First of all, of course, for each of us as individuals, but also for societal well-being. Healthcare is very important, and it matters also for the productivity of the workforce. And finally, as you all know, the finances have become a major challenge in many countries because the financial expenditures are increasing. And in fact, it's the first challenge for many governments is to see how year after year the healthcare expenditures increase. I don't have the Russian data because I couldn't find really reliable data which were comparable long enough backwards. But one thing I would assert is they are increasing too. And why can I assert this? If we look at the aging of the population, you can see that also in Russia, it is projected that the people over 65 years of age are going to double in the next 40 years. And if we look at worldwide data, this is no exception. We have a large demographic shift towards more senior people. And on the right side, you see that after age 50, 55, most people will have some kind of a health problem, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, and so forth. Once they turn out to be 85, if ever they reach this age, most people, in fact 85% of the people, have 2 or more healthcare problems. So polymorbidity is a problem which increases with age, so they consume much more healthcare services than younger people, no surprise. Here you see the other side, which is the percent of women in Russia who report a poor healthcare status. And that till 55 roughly is plus minus flat, but then it decreases substantially. And if you look at the data, how many are physically impaired, cannot work normally anymore, you will see it goes in parallel. The number of people who can still do a perfect work with 70 or 75 is declining steeply. Second or third challenge, so we have finance, aging, is obesity. And obesity in Russia is increasing also significantly. So in the US, it's almost an epidemic. If you look at the states, since 1980, every year the number of people who are obese is increasing. And you have in many states, mainly the southern states of the US, you have over 40% of people who have a BMI which is extremely high. If you age standardize the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, which is one of the consequences of longer lasting obesity, you can see that Russia has a higher even prevalence than the USA. Not in absolute terms, but age standardized it is. And so you can see there are consequences. In the US, for example, if you look at the cost, you have the cost of the consequences of obesity are about twice as high than the cost to treat all cancer patients. So it's a humongous cost. If McKinsey did recently a study and looked at how many indirect and direct costs of obesity, so how much food, how much clothes, how much, of course, health and disease expenditures, it's $500 billion a year. $500 billion a year. So a huge number. Challenge 4, and I'm sure you're not surprised, many more people smoke in Russia than meantime in other parts of the world.
Even more than in China.
More than China. And you know, the problem, one of the big problems is smoking is an excellent tax income for states. So there's a very double-edged sword about the political leadership doing anti-smoking campaigns because it reduces state income. And that is one of the problems, for example, also in China. I don't know how it's in Russia, but I suspect looking at the numbers, it's probably not very different. In Europe, as you know, the smoking is going down. And in our company, for example, I did decide to have a smoke-free company, which means not only in the buildings, but also smoke-free on the grounds, in the gardens and in the park. And so if somebody wants to smoke, he has to leave the company, but then he needs to check out, and these hours are deducted from the working time. So that's small incentives. Now, why is smoking such a problem? Most people know it, but of course respiratory diseases, heart diseases, lung cancer, and stroke. So you can see lung cancer 23 times more, chronic respiratory diseases 12 times more. So enormous secondary diseases based on smoking, which intellectually most of us know, but I smoked till my final exam when I studied medicine, and then I decided to stop. And I only could stop after having tried twice, because I started again, until I knew I would be addicted to nicotine for my life. So the first cigarette you take again, you start again. So that's the problem of being addicted. So since then I didn't smoke cigarettes anymore. The leading causes for death, cardiovascular is still number one. And we have a large campaign against hypertension in Russia, for example, to raise the awareness and treatment. You can see in every country where there is a good campaign and a good treatment for hypertension, the incidence of stroke and heart disease goes dramatically down. Cancer, and then something which is an anomaly. The first two are no anomaly internationally, but the third one is injuries. So I don't know the reason, but you know, how does one do prevention? How is the perception of the male Russian about vulnerability or machismo? I don't know, so you will tell me. But it seems to me that it's really surprisingly high. It may also have a relationship with drinking. I just saw this accident in Moscow about the drunken driver and killing many people while doing that. And then respiratory, of course, with smoking. So we have a blueprint in Russia for healthcare reform by 2020 to increase life expectancy. And you see here, life expectancy is indicated with 68 years. That's tremendously low. I mean, that's incredibly low. If you look in the highest life expectancy probably is Japan, way over 80, but it's reaching 80 in Europe. And in the US also, although I have to say it may be a peak, because with the children, you see with the many obese children, the life expectancy may go down in the US. So I think a lot of work to be done, and reducing strokes and heart disease by 20%. It's also important from a point of GDP. The gross domestic product, if you can reduce mortality to a level, for example, of the EU, you will have a much better GDP. So the morbidity and mortality is really something which economically for the country is highly relevant. In the US, there was a study published looking at the main drivers for cost: diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, hypertension, cancer, and obesity. And then projecting out from the life expectancy and the shift in demographics, how the costs would evolve. And you can see the costs are tripling almost in every case. And this is billions of dollars. So now we are talking about obesity and cancer and hypertension is $1 trillion per year. And this is enormous. So we are talking, if you're successful in fighting obesity or in treating hypertension properly or avoiding diabetes in many cases, you can save enormous amounts of money in the healthcare system. I didn't mention Alzheimer's disease because till now, unfortunately, we have nothing, or almost nothing. So the purpose of the pharmaceutical industry, and that's something I find very important, is not primarily to earn money. It's primarily to reduce mortality, reduce morbidity, and then do it in a cost-effective and profitable manner. But the last point is the outcome of the first two. It's not the primary objective. The primary objective is to innovate and find better medicines again and again and again. This is why we're here. That's why society pays us. If we don't do this, we will fail, and if we focus too much on the money, we will fail too. Now, did the industry succeed? And I just have 3 examples here on mortality data. What you have to do is to take a time frame which is long enough to see really a change. But, you know, take ulcers or take hypertension. Today, ulcers generally, you take a drug and you are not undergoing surgery anymore. So before, you had to go to surgery, and it had a lot of secondary effects, side effects of surgery. So huge improvements. And in cancer, today, if you are over 65 years old or 65 years old, you will have a big chance to live longer than 5 years with cancer. And that's up from 50% in 1980. What has changed? Better diagnostics earlier, better intervention, better diagnostics. So diagnostics and intervention have improved. And for children, if you look for children, 80% of the children with cancer today can be cured. So huge progress. And the mortality has been cut in half in the last 25 years. Life expectancy here, I show you the Swiss data, how it increased, and also then the chronic disability, how it decreased. So you have two things which happen in parallel: decreasing mortality and improving the productivity of the people. So if they can stay self-sufficient longer, makes a big change not only for themselves but also for their families. Costs of pharmaceuticals. Always people say, yes, but pharmaceuticals are very expensive. If you take an approach where you look at system costs, where you look, if you do a treatment, how much does it reduce the bill for the doctor or the bill for the hospital? Then suddenly you have a savings which is very substantial. Innovation. So innovation is absolutely crucial if we want to be able to address diseases which will become big cost drivers and very important for individuals. One of the ways of thinking about the human body is a semantic system where between the different organs and the different cells there's a language. They speak to each other. What do you have to do? And this is being done either by neural transmitters or by proteins which are acting as a communication means between different cells. These are signaling pathways. So this is an ultra complex network of signals within our bodies. What we are trying to do is with modern technologies, high throughputs biology, model organism, protein research, and very importantly bioinformatics, to really understand much better pieces of this language. And it becomes more and more complicated. When I look, for example, what we know about diabetes when I studied medicine and what is known today, it's amazing how much more is understood about the signals which lead to a disease or to maintain health. And so we are trying to identify nodal points where different signals come in, where a yes or a no, a more or a less, decides if the patient is sick or is healthy. That's the objective of identifying this. I'll give you an example. There is one pathway which is called the mTOR pathway, and it goes over several steps of signals which enhance the signal or inhibit the signal. And the signal does tell the cell grow, multiply, create new blood vessels, angiogenesis, and take up more nutrients. So it's no surprise that people thought maybe that is important in cancer. And we looked for blockers of that pathway, and we found one product which is called Affinitor, which blocks the mTOR mechanism. That is one key element in this language. And we saw proliferation of cells goes down, the formation of new vessels goes down, and the nutrient uptake goes down. And then we went into clinic, and we saw that first in kidney cancer, so you see circled the big, on the baseline, the big is a cancer, and then you see after 4 months how it disappeared. In breast cancer, and we just got approval in the US now for certain forms of breast cancer, and we have other cancers we are investigating where we have very small numbers of patients right now, and we are doing larger trials. And so what is happening is that we have new, more targeted cancer therapies than we used to have. So they are very specific on certain attack points. And one example is Gleevec, which inhibits a protein, an enzyme, which tells the leucemic cell multiply. And when you block this enzyme, it stops. And here you can see when we introduced the therapy, we had over 95% of the patient who have a long response. So these patients live like chronically healthy or chronically ill, depending on how you want to say it. But most are at work, function normally, and have zero cancer cells visible or detectable in the body. Doesn't mean that they don't have them anymore, but not detectable. So we have survival rates which are very, very high. And right now, I mentioned to Oleg before, we have a challenge here in Russia because of the patent. We're still patented, but we also have generic companies who copy it, although by law they wouldn't be allowed. And there comes the difficulty of getting the government intervening to make sure that patents are maintained and intellectual property is maintained, because it's so fundamental for the investments we're doing in innovation. So if you imagine how much does it cost today for us to go from the lab to registration until we are in the market, it's about $2 billion. So we spend about $2 billion for one product. And if we don't have a protection which is limited in time, then we cannot make a return. And then you stop investing. And so in countries, it's crucial that the countries, if they want science and investment in science in the country, that really the intellectual property is being protected. That's not only true for medicines, it's true in many other fields. Now, we have invested continuously more. You see on the left side the Novartis research and development spending. We spend over $9 billion every year now. And you can see that we have launched more new products here in the US than any other pharmaceutical company in the last 10 years. So we have had a very good performance from a point of view of innovation. And for us, innovation is the most important. But we also believe that it's very important that people have access to inexpensive medicine. So we are also the second largest generic producer in the world. So we are making copies of drugs once the intellectual property with the patents have disappeared. I'll talk about something else now, about winning. So how do you win in an industry? And many books are being written, some very famous books, and no consensus about what is needed to be successful as a leader. And in fact, if you look at two of the very successful books, In Search of Excellence and Built to Last, where they analyze companies, why they succeeded, and which criteria would be the most important. If you are looking later on, 20% of them have disappeared and 46% have difficulties, and 30%, a good third, is still successful. So if at all, the recipe wasn't perfect. So how should we think about our organizations? And I think it's also true in many ways of universities. Also, you have a more challenging environment because it's more egalitarian than in a company. In a company, we are more hierarchical. At least I hope you are less hierarchical. We have individuals and teams in the company. So I look at it as living organisms, and we have to set a direction. We have to get alignment internally and get a commitment of people to do it, and then we have to ensure that it's being done. So it's really 3 steps which need to happen. And if you look at our company, for example, what are we looking at to fulfill these 3 steps? So we start with a purpose. Why are we here? What vision and aspirations do we have? I know you have one for the university also. For you, it would be education and research. And obviously, where do you want to be in 10 and 20 years? The aspirations. What values do we have? What do we allow, what do we want, and what we don't allow? The boundaries are very important for people to know what's not allowed. And what are the core capabilities we need? What do we really have to master in order to be successful? The objectives and strategy, what is the top team? This is not one person. It's about the team who surrounds you. How do you complement each other? Are you just the same, or do you have different skills and can you use them? The structure, the core processes, the performance metrics, and the incentive system. So in general, to have ambitious goals, have organizational discipline, while having a climate which is trusting and supporting each other, I think is very important, both axes. In our case, when we look at capabilities, we say external focus, innovation, people, and performance. So performance matters, results matter. And I'm often asked by people, who do you promote? Why do you promote somebody? And I look at three things. Competence, and when I talk about competence, it's technical competence and interpersonal competence, the ability to deal with each other. Secondly, intrinsic motivation. So you cannot carry the horse to the race. The horse has to have the fire in himself. And in fact, we are facing so many difficult situations during our professional lives that you have to have a lot of ambition and motivation to keep going. And that needs to be balanced by integrity. Because if ambition goes overboard, integrity suffers. So integrity is crucial. We are, every year we have a balanced scorecard in setting objectives. Everybody in the company has written objectives. We evaluate twice a year, once in a very formal way, end of the year, and we pay accordingly to performance. Measurable and qualitative. This is a meta-study which was published in the Harvard Business Review, which I found very interesting, looking at motivators and hygiene factors. Basically, the difference is motivators are things which, when present, motivate a lot. Hygiene factors are things when they are present, they don't motivate a lot. But if they are not present, they are big demotivators. And so I think mentally and organizationally, it's really important to make the difference. What is demotivating? And I have just to take care. But, you know, if you ask about administration, will this be motivating? Generally not. Can it be demotivating? You bet, a lot. So you have to have it right in order not to harm, but that's not how you will be winning. And so the question is, what leadership style, what organizational culture, because these two things really determine the performance. And I'll come to the end with a few thoughts. There are unrecognized forces which influence our behaviors. So the unconscious does exist. And it influences how we act and what we do and what we don't do. And I'll give you 3 studies which have been published in Science. Science did a review article in 2010 on the topic of subliminal stimulation. So for example, if people come into a room where on the wall they have pictures of libraries, people suddenly speak more softly, not as loud. And they are unaware of it themselves, and they are unaware what triggers their behavior. If they put leather briefcases on the desk, people become more competitive without being aware themselves and without being aware what triggered the competitiveness. And then they did another study where they used a cleaning agent in the room. They dispersed it so you could smell it. And people took their desks cleaner and more in order than when it was absent. So these are just 3 examples which show, and behavioral economics, which is a new branch of economics and an important one, studies behaviors of people without them being conscious about how they behave, for example, in negotiations. So let me finish on a few useful concepts I found. First of all, when you're a leader of an organization, you become the figure of identification for the organization. And you will be talked about having said this or that, which you may never have said. The words you're saying will be, discussed. What did he really mean? Oleg said, did he mean that or that? People start to, and then they may experience you as an authority figure like they experience their own parents or grandparents or a teacher, without being aware that you're a very different person than they were. So transference and then your reaction on it may play a role. And as a leader, very often you're being attributed things which you are not. Aggressive things and positive things, both idealization and the opposite. And the ability to be able to contain that, to absorb it without reacting, without becoming aggressive, without becoming angry, is a very important capacity one has to have. So just a few things which are important. And the negative capability describes the ability to sustain uncertainty without having to act. For example, as a physician, when somebody comes in sick, you have to make a decision. Do I have to act or not act? You may not know everything. And you may think, okay, but tomorrow I will have the information I will need. Tomorrow I will know how to act. In organizations, it's the same. You may feel pressures. You don't know the result yet. You don't know what you should be doing. But you have the confidence, the optimism that things will fall into place, and at the right time you will have the right answer. And that's also something which is very important. Challenges, multiple stakeholders, they all want something different. Patients want drugs, the state doesn't want to pay, pharmaceutical industries want to make money, the press wants to have news, the analysts want to have the right information, complex regulations, travel, the information flow 24/7. If you don't answer anymore within 2 days, they say, what is happening? Are you sick? And so self-management becomes very important. The question is, what is leadership really? And I think leadership, in the end, is the capability of transforming ordinary people into extraordinary people who make outstanding things. And that's, I think, what we have as leaders, we have to be able to do. Help others to do outstanding things and to be and become outstanding themselves. With that, I thank you for the attention, and I'm ready for challenges and questions.
Well, thank you. Well, Daniel excelled, of course, in his presentation by breaking all records of speed in the presentation.
Well, you put a lot of pressure on me. So.
Right now we have time to clarify and to ask additional questions and to figure out the details. Yeah, Maxim Buev, please.
Daniel, thanks very much for the lecture. I have a question. You mentioned in your lecture that you've got a problem with the patents in Russia, or just it was issued very slowly. And I think it's a serious problem because on the one hand it leads to the problem in Russia that we've got lots of fake drugs in the market. On the one hand. On the other hand, what it leads to a situation when in many cases, well, the mortality rates can be reduced considerably just by like quickly issuing patents. And I'll give you another example. There was this famous charity set up by two well-known Russian actresses, Dina Korzun and Stepan Kamatrov, that is which is gift of life in English. And basically they managed within 6 years to reduce mortality rates in certain kind of strains of cancer among children just by importing the drug which is called Erwinaze. It's an English drug basically.
Yep.
And they were also complaining that it's not patented in Russia, so they literally have to, they have difficulties, so they need to, in many cases, take their patients from Moscow to London. So basically my question, what do you think, what should be done in order to speed up the process of issuing patents? What are the major challenges in that respect?
You're addressing, in fact, 3 challenges. Number 1 is issuing patents, which you mentioned. Second is patent is being given, but not respected. So that's, for example, this case of Glivec, where we have a tender with government, and we still have a patent, but government also accepts tenders from copies which are illegal. So government has to put their act together, number 1. Secondly, you talk about counterfeiting, which is a big problem in Russia, in other parts of the world too, Latin America and China, for example. So the attitude in China is when there is a counterfeit and we go to government and we say we have a counterfeit problem, they intervene immediately. They close it down, people go to jail. And the reason is that most of these counterfeits have either too much active substance or too little or none at all, 0. Just 0. We are selling, I'll give you an example. We're selling the currently best malaria drug to Africa at cost. So we make 0 profit since years. And we have about 100 million treatments we sell a year now. And we saved in the last, or helped to save in the last 4 years about 1 million people, mostly children, through this medication. We uncovered a counterfeit operation where the drug has no active substance. And the kids who take these drugs, there's a huge chance they will die. So the people who do it, this is murder. It's nothing short of murder. And the people who do this are absolutely ruthless, but there's so much profit in it that they bribe, in the chain, they bribe people to put counterfeited drugs. The problem is also at the wholesaler level. So manufacturer, wholesaler, pharmacy or hospital. At the wholesaler level, some wholesalers, to make more money, take a piece of genuine drugs and counterfeit drugs and they mix it up. And they repackage. So with that, they increase, of course, their margin. So that's totally criminal. And is a problem. But that's simply criminal. The copies who are of good quality, in my view, are an economic stealing, but at least they are decent medicines. So my view is the cleanup has to start at the top. And it means fighting corruption and making sure that the law is being implemented. Having proper laws, but then legal, knowing that the legal system will be implemented is crucial.
Okay, I see one and then the second question and the third one. Okay, Artemy Magman.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have a question of this kind. I think your talk split in 2 parts. In a way, because first it was graphs and statistics, and the medications whose action you described in very mechanical terms. And then you switched to the problems of management and leadership, where you sounded very different. It was the question of psychology, prudence, judgment, interpersonal tact, etc. And in fact, there are 2 rationalities involved in your experience, obviously. For me, as a social scientist, of course, the question is whether medicine doesn't also need more of this prudence, rationality, and communicative competence, etc. Because obviously, you as a pharmaceutical company have less exposure to this problem, but nevertheless, your drugs, one has to know how to apply them. This
Sure.
applies, some of them probably you just swallow it and then you're cured. But, well, the drugs with which we ordinarily operate, we need to think ourselves how to take them, when to take them, etc.
Yes.
I think this is a big challenge of the current medicine, which is not sufficiently addressed. I'm just wondering whether the company also does something by the way of culture, training of people with regard to their medicine.
Yes, we do. What you're addressing really is a problem Anna did explain to us before some of her studies here in Russia, and the question of trust and information, and can you, do you get, first the first question as a patient is, do you get the appropriate information? That can be technical. It has a technical aspect, but it also has a social aspect in the sense that if you're a patient and, for example, you're an older man who had a surgery and you live in the 5th floor and you have to walk up and your wife is sick, you know, and you have to do this every day to go and shop, is a very different situation than if you don't have that problem. So physicians, in my experience, very often forget to understand the subjective reality of a patient, you know. Secondly, you address the question when to take a drug, and we know compliance, meaning do people take the drugs how they are supposed to take them, and as long as they are supposed, is very low. People, even with hypertension, where you should treat yourself for life, as long as you have the hypertension, you should take antihypertensive drugs. Many patients after 6 months stop. The reasons are complex, I think. Let's leave aside the costs, which can be one reason. But the drug you're taking reminds you every day that you're sick. Every day something reminds you you are not in good shape. And you don't feel anything about your hypertension. It's zero. You may even have a side effect from your drug. So it's knowledge, it's emotion, and it's a trusting relationship, and it's follow-up. Follow-up to know from a physician that you cannot just give an order and expect that it will be executed. There were interesting studies looking if the physician would send the medication by mail, or give it through the nurse, or give it himself with explanation or without explanation. The compliance was vastly different. So by mail the lowest, and by personal explanation and personal relationship the best. So many factors play a role. We have in transplantation, we have a transplantation drug, and in cancer, we have programs where we give ongoing information if the patients want it. So we have platforms, mostly it's internet related, where patients can get information and tell problems, and it will be answered. They can also call in. And we have outside people who would give advice, nurses in general, where we can say, you can go there to get the information you need.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Yes, thank you very much for your speech there. I want to go back to a little bit more the first part with the graph. And would you maybe be able to show the graph of the prices going up from 2003 to 2030, 23? There was an increase, like a threefold increase. Sorry,
which one?
Split over cancer, obesity.
Oh, this, I know which one, yeah.
Exactly.
This one.
This one. I was interested because this fall, we're still trying to process this one, because obesity is very clear. In the next 20 years, there's a huge problem of that going up. And then in cancer,
What is the biggest risk factor for cancer? Tell me. What is the biggest risk factor for cancer? Aside of smoking, let's forget smoking. Yeah. No, aging. Old age. When do you get a cancer? Generally not when you're 20, rather when you're 70 or 80. So that is purely demographic related. That's mostly, So with an aging population, the incidence and prevalence of cancer increases dramatically.
So by keeping people older, you also increase the cost of
Yes.
By saving lives and by
Yes, sure.
So that's interesting with the next graph, which was
Which?
I think it's two further down.
What?
The graph with you saving by taking pharmaceutical.
Oh, the costs.
This one.
So what it says is, if you treat, when somebody's sick, when you treat rationally and correctly, in fact, the overall system provides a saving, because the hospital stay will be shorter or can be avoided, and there are shorter periods of being sick. So you save costs through that.
So what I then don't really understand is the relationship between these two, whereas you have an industry that is saving money with pharmaceuticals, and on the other hand, having a threefold increase in on the other hand. Do you understand how that makes sense in my head? Yeah.
Well, short of saying, my dear friend, you go to euthanasia at age 65, you know, I don't know if you're a candidate. I'm not. So that would be, of course, a fantastic way to save money, which is you work, and once you stop working, goodbye. From a point of view of society, it's a little bit a difficult concept to sell, at least if you are over 50.
Because I think the first graph would be fair if you also take into account that threefold counter cost, the amount of productivity that the same person has.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is the part that.
Yes, and I would add the following. You know, the other graph you have to look at is not only the life expectancy, but the functionality. So do you improve the functionality of people if they are healthy? You do massively. So it's a question of well-being, but it's also a productivity issue. And I would argue that with this life expectancy, when the introduction of the pension age was made in the 60s, life expectancy was much lower. But it has not been adapted to the new life expectancy. And I would argue people would have to work longer. We will have to work longer. It's relatively simple. I'm not talking about the worker in the street who physically is, you know, used. He should be able to retire. But intellectuals, people who work in offices, they should work longer. And in fact, if I look at people, my colleagues in research or anywhere else, you know, they gladly work longer. We have now people who retire, and we have a workforce after 65. But in, you know, the next problem, we didn't talk about this, but pensions. Do you think France and Germany and Italy and Spain and Switzerland can pay the pensions which they have promised to the people in the 70s? There's no way. The money isn't here, even if they print a lot. So the problem we will be facing, and you will be facing, is that all the promises which have been made about pension and retirement will not be able to be fulfilled. So we better take care ourselves of our future. Sorry, this was a little bit, was not in my speech.
People standing over there, I mean, there are 3 chairs here if you want to get in, and then, because apparently the question and answers will continue for long.
I don't know.
Кто-то хочет зайти, здесь есть стулья просто, зайдите, 3 человека.
Вопрос по-русски,
Я переведу потом, сейчас, хорошо. Okay, please, yeah, filtering. While you're doing this, I'll pass the question to Anna Tёмкина, who is Novartis chair, so I guess the question is coming from Anna, and then there will be the next question, which I will translate.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I really have two questions, if possible. First question is that at least in Russia we have trends from one side of over-consumption of drugs, self-prescription and over-consumption. From the other side, this is a trend of avoidance of drug, naturalization of treatment and avoidance of drug. And so I'm interested in what is the politics of company, or could be the politics, over these two extreme way of relation to drugs. This is like first question. And my second question is really provocative. I am afraid that not a lot of people will believe that pharmaceutical company is working not for benefits. And so what are the arguments could be given to prove that this is not the first goal of pharmaceutical company?
So let me first answer the second question. My view is the following. In anything anyone does, be it a restaurant, be it an architect, be it a pharmaceutical company, be it a doctor, the way to success is to do what you're supposed to do extremely well. If you focus on money and making money, I have deep doubts if you will succeed. But that's my personal belief. In a capitalistic, market-oriented system, you have to be profitable, otherwise you die. You're disappearing. So you have to ask yourself, what good would it be if we are not here anymore? So you need to be competitive, no question. Also from a financial point of view, you need to be competitive. The question is, what do you sacrifice and what do you don't sacrifice? Would you sacrifice short-term profits in order to please, for example, your shareholders? My answer is no. You will get the shareholders which you deserve. If you always focus on the short term, you will get people who invest for the short term. If you are declaring that you're working to build the company in the long term and do the right thing for society and the company, then of course you will get people who are long-term oriented. So this is my view, this is the way we have managed it, and if I look at the outcome, it's not so bad. So, do I believe people believe me? I'm not naive. So, if you are a global, successful company with 130,000 employees and making 10 billion in profits, people say, I don't know what kind of animal this is, but I don't trust it. So that is the reality. And if you cannot deal with this and accept it and nevertheless try to do what you really believe is right, you're on the wrong spot. So the first question, tell me again.
About relation to drugs, overconsumption.
Yeah, I would say it goes a little bit in the same direction. I believe that the only thing which is sustainable is, in the end, what is right for the patient. So whatever the system and the healthcare system is, it should be focused on doing the right and optimal thing for the patient. And the system should be built according to that, or changed according to that. And if there is over-medication, especially, we know medications all have side effects. So there is no absolutely totally safe medication. Everything has a positive and a negative effect. So if you have negative side effects and it's the wrong medication or too short an antibiotic course or an unnecessary one, it's all bad. So the question is, how do you make sure that this is being done better? And in most countries it would be that people for most medications would have to get a prescription by a doctor. It's controlled at the doctor level or the pharmacy level. And of course, over-medication, in my view, is only negative because it will lead to a counter-reaction.
Thank you. Ваш вопрос.
Стоимость разработки и вывода на рынок препарата, по оценкам современным, колеблется от 400 миллионов до $1,5 миллиарда долларов. Есть ли, по вашему мнению, перспектива снижения затрат на разработку конкретного одного препарата? То есть будет ли удешевление процесса разработки и вывода на рынок препарата?
Research, development and marketing of a new drug right now costs between 400,000 to $1,5 миллиарда? $1.5 billion per drug. And the question is, do you think that there is trend or is an opportunity to reduce this amount of costs in the near future?
No. No, because the regulations have become much stricter, much more demanding. And so we work always on productivity, but I have never seen that, you know, there's longer studies required, more studies required, and every patient in a study is more expensive. So I don't see a way. I have seen the opposite. It's more and more and more and more expensive.
Let's take a look at the students. I mean, they are surprisingly...
Yeah, somebody there. Yeah.
A very short question. Please answer, what was the worst country you have ever worked with, and please explain why?
The worst country is the country we haven't worked with. Why? Because there was total state control and complete skimming of anything we would do in that state. Skimming meaning the state would take away, and the people who really were supposed or to get it would not get it. Now you can guess which country it is.
Okay, please.
But in general, let me just be a little bit less clear-cut in that. I would say we have, of course, in developing countries sometimes governments which are extremely difficult to work with. And there are two problems. One is corruption, which is a problem, especially for companies like us. You cannot pay. So when you compete against other global companies, it's not a problem. But when you compete against local players who do bribe, then it's a problem. You are uncompetitive. And that's still the case in a number of developing countries.
Yes, I totally agree with your comment about being competitive and being excellent at whatever you do. So I just wondered, like, how does your company that you mentioned to be the second inexpensive pharmaceutical firm in whichever region you mentioned, how do you stay competitive, like, in the market?
Inexpensive, meaning, where did you get that?
You said you were the second, unless I heard it wrong, you said you were the second cheapest generic.
Oh, yeah, I expressed myself not very well. So we are the second, we have different divisions. We have one division which is focused completely on innovation. It's the largest one, pharmaceuticals, prescription, branded, patented prescription products. We have another arm which is generics, copies, inexpensive copies. And this is, we are there the second largest company in the world. We have a third arm which is self-medication, and then we have vaccines and diagnostics, prevention. So I think the best is, of course, if you can prevent a disease. Second best is to treat it cheaply. And the third is, if nothing is available, then you do the innovative, more expensive way. And did you have a question about that, or?
Yeah, I think you've already answered, but I was just wondering, how do you make your price so cheap while still being profitable?
Because we don't invest in R&D. There's no R&D investment, very minimal. And the risk is much lower. Because when you make a copy, you know that the originator, you know, has success. You know exactly what it does. So you don't have the risk which we have. You know, if you look at the innovative pharmaceutical arm, we have one compound out of 10,000 which will be successful in the end. So the risk of missing is enormous. Even in the latest phases of the clinical research, after 10 years, you still have 30% failing. So this is a huge cost, which is built into the 2 billion figure I mentioned. It's the failures.
Well, I think there should be...
Last question?
Not really.
Not really?
We're not going to let you go that easy.
Okay, here there are more questions.
I see the hands, but there should be some profit in being a university department chair. So, Maxim, once again.
Sorry.
I'll ask you a silly question, actually. Well, basically, we do know that research and development is costly, right? And in general in the pharmaceutical industry. But I'm sure you know the story. It was put across all the news agencies in Europe and the US. There was this guy, 15-year-old, who won some competition organized by Harvard or MIT, I don't remember now, but he just literally what he did is he searched internet, like Wikipedia, Google, whatever.
Yeah.
And he came up with a very new idea for a test, for a really cheap test of pancreatic cancer, and literally like reduce costs of this test literally like tenfold. So what do you think? Is just like a fluke, one-off thing, or there is a scope for such unexpected discoveries from literally a 15-year-old kid can like?
Fantastic. I hope he'll be very successful.
No, I'm just.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know the facts. So has the test been tested?
Yeah. It's being kind of implemented in
wonderful.
Production by Harvard, I think.
Wonderful.
But I was quite surprised because normally it's you really need like well-developed labs to.
Yeah, I have become, of course, a skeptic, and I'm like Thomas. I want to touch before I believe. So, but let's assume it's true. Then I would say it's great. I don't see in our industry that you could just skim the internet and find suddenly a new drug. I don't exclude it, but I haven't had examples of it. While the bioinformatics, the information on the net, has become absolutely crucial. The biggest problem we have today in research about data is transferring data, because the data are so huge, the amounts of data, that it takes so long to transport the data from site to site. That's the biggest problem. And we can now, for less than $1,000, we can decode your genetic code. For less than $1,000. And this will go down. This will be maybe $100 in 2-3 years. And then the question is, what can you do with it? So it's only a basic information. Then you have all the epigenetic changes, all the ramifications. And then there are insurance ramifications. There are, what do you do if you know you have a pancreatic cancer? Because pancreatic cancer is extremely difficult to treat and generally diagnosed too late. So if it would become a routine cancer test, that could be very positive.
Okay, before we go back to student questions, I would like to ask another person in power, the Vice Governor of St. Petersburg,
Oh, if I had known the government is so close, Vice Governor.
Danny Vacella, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I have the only question, but please don't tell me no on my question. The question
then it's yes.
Do you believe in Russian innovations? What do you think about Russian pharmaceutical companies? What do you think about the R&D?
Not competitive.
Why?
I think there are probably a number of reasons. I think, first of all, one aspect you need is to have absolutely world-class academic institutions in the field. Biology, chemistry, name it, medicine. Secondly, and I'm not saying you don't have that, but you need that. Secondly, you need to incentivize people to innovate. How do you make sure people are interested in innovation? Also academics. You need to allow them to patent their innovations. They have to be able to patent their innovations and to protect their innovations. Very crucial. Third thing you need a financing arm, basically venture capital. So you need investors who are willing to support researchers who make discoveries. And when do investors invest? When they are sure or they believe they can make a profit one day. And they can only do a profit one day if the patent laws are intact, for example. I was mentioning to Oleg that I think it's a big missed opportunity before when we had a discussion, because you have a heritage of science. You should be absolutely at the top. And my colleagues who visited several academic institutions said some of the institutions have leadership who are blocking basically old system. And they also said that in Siberia they have seen some biotechnology companies who seem very good. So the question is also, how much energy do you need to change old system versus starting new ones? And I think it's a very complex problem, but it's a solvable problem. So I think it's solvable. But today internationally, no, not on the top list. Locally maybe yes, in Russia yes, but not yet. But I would hope, you know.
Yeah, Arbidol, which is the Russian flu treatment, has not hit European markets yet.
Yeah, and you know, for example, we would like to do, we are in vaccines and we're high-tech vaccines. We would like to make a collaboration with a Russian vaccine company, and then we visit and we look at the quality, we look at the investments needed, huge investments needed in order to up. Yeah.
Okay, I take two more questions from students before I ask my question as a chair in the end.
Okay.
So there was a gentleman over there and there's a lady over there.
Here,
Actually,
three.
students.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Let's start with the gentleman.
Pharmaceutical companies make most of the profits at being an industry that's a reactive industry. So reactive as in somebody's sick, but you said the best way to take care of people is to teach them to prevent the disease. That seems to be against how the pharmaceutical companies make their money, because then they're selling patients.
Yes.
Do you have any examples of how pharmaceutical companies are going to maybe starting with the youth to teach them the proper way?
We're not being paid for that, my friend.
So is the government responsibility?
Yes, I think so. My belief, that is really a government responsibility. The education, health education, the prevention. I believe these are things which are one of the most important tasks of government. Education anyway, and health education is part of it.
Is it not in the best interest of the pharmaceutical companies to maintain their consumers?
Yes, but there are so many new consumers. You know what our biggest problem is? There are too many. So the costs go up for the government, and with that, more pressure on prices. So our industry has declining prices year after year. It's a big issue because we need to improve the productivity. And why are prices decreasing? Because there is so much pressure on public financing of the healthcare. So we are not worried about having too few sick people. I'm more worried about having too many.
Please.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Actually, I'm not a student of this very university. I represent Lector Investment Fund, Luxembourg-based private equity special situations fund.
Okay.
Currently, we are considering investing in pharmaceuticals, and it's really my question is, what's your view of the global perspective of investing in pharmaceuticals, not only in Russia but also in the world? But actually, I'm speaking not about the venture investments, investing in startups or investing in drugs. I'm speaking about private investments and stable companies.
Like us.
Like yours. Exactly.
Well, I think first of all, you have, of course, a industry which is relatively insensitive to economic cycles. Our cycles are product cycles, so it's patents. Patents play a much bigger role, innovation cycle plays a bigger role than the economic cycle. So we're less exposed right now than many others. Secondly, the price earnings multiple are very low, and the return on investment is quite good. So if you look at the dividend yield, for many companies it's 3, 4, even 5%. And in hard currencies, you cannot earn that, you know, with other instruments, unless you go in high-risk instruments. So I find the risk-reward proportion is relatively good. So the price earnings were 25, 30 times. They are now 9 times maybe. So it's historically, if you say industries are about 15 times, it's below historical averages. So from that point, I find it relatively inexpensive, and my wealth is mostly invested, or almost entirely invested, in our company. But it's also that I know it relatively well, so I feel comfortable.
In some industries and in some particular areas of drugs, maybe you can name some which would, in your view, would be profitable in the next few years.
Yeah, if you look at various companies, of course you look at the late stage pipeline, and you try to estimate where you have a relatively high potential from a commercial side, you know. And right now there are many, many cancer therapies which are coming to market, not only from us, but other companies too. So you need to study the data.
Thank you. We have a question over there.
Good evening, my name is Lector. I'm from St Petersburg State University, faculty of political science. So my question is a little bit about political questions. So as we know, your company Novartis is one of the most influential company, but maybe not only in economic and business sphere, maybe also in political sphere. So maybe can you give us one or two examples of influence of your company to the process of making political decisions in the sphere of political social policy, for example, in Switzerland? Thank you.
Yes. So let me give you an example. We did commission a study done by McKinsey to look at the comparative performance of healthcare systems in different countries. And the way we did it is to say, please check specific diseases. So we took diabetes, hypertension, breast cancer, stroke, and chronic obstructive lung disease. And we looked at the diagnostic, treatment, and outcome and costs. US, Canada, Germany, Switzerland, England. And what was very interesting is that the productivity factor measured by the outcome was partially over 20 times different in different countries. So, for example, the best results on diabetes was in England, meaning better outcomes for less money, and the worst was in the US. In breast cancer, the best outcome was in the US and the worst was in England. And when you looked at why the factors, what is behind it, then for example in breast cancer it was in the US many more women go to systematic cancer screening, while in the UK not. And in the UK they start to treat later and less aggressively than in the US. And the outcome is much better in the US. Chronic obstructive lung disease in France, for example, was much better than in the US or in Switzerland. And the reason were they do flu vaccine in advance every year, so they are more prone to have the flu. And so the flu prevention, and they do the diagnostic flow metering of how the function is of the lung very systematically in France and not in others, and then treat accordingly. So the outcome was that we started to talk to governments and saying, why don't you compare what others do and how they do it? And in Switzerland, the government, the Minister for Health, has formed a roundtable and has invited all stakeholders, physicians and insurance, and I'm there, and governments, cantonal governments, which is like the state, smaller units, are there in discussing what pilots will we do, what is the role of government, what are the roles of other players, and how can we tackle that. And we're starting with chronic obstructive lung disease and diabetes. These are the two fields in Switzerland. And we found, by the way, we found in Switzerland In breast cancer, big differences between different parts of the country. Same story. In some cantons, the breast cancer diagnostic, the mammography was paid for and people went, and in others it wasn't paid for and people didn't go. Outcome much worse, outcome much better, because diagnosed much earlier in the disease stage. So my plea is rational approach. Don't worry about interest groups, just rational approach and learn from others how to do it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, now comes my question. I was sitting kind of trying not to interfere, but here's finally the pleasure of a chair. Already today we, of course, we've come, we've basically encountered a topic which is usually the question of similarities and differences between natural and social sciences. And of course, Novartis usually contributes to natural sciences chairs. It supports natural sciences programs. It is good that you are supporting. Sorry.
No problem. I'll take care of it.
And the usual discussion we have, at least in this country, sometimes abroad, is when I meet a biologist or a physicist and we go into hard discussion. They would say, well, you know, we understand why we develop physics, because then the airplanes fly and the cars drive. And biologists will always say, sure, we do these things, and then you see people get better with our pharmaceuticals. And what is the point, what's the use of political and social science? I mean, tell us, and this is like one of their hard hits which is supposed to knock down social scientists. Where is the vaccine against corruption? Give us a drug against corruption and you will prove that social sciences are worth it. And usually, you know, the beaten social scientist leaves this boxing ring without strong arguments. Today, the discussion with you has given me one argument at least. And I really thank God that you came to us, because right now we'll use it in the next boxing match with natural scientists I will have. Because if I had a budget between $400 million to $1.5 billion to develop measures against corruption in this country, I mean, I would imagine that the strength of social science could end up finally weighing in favor of transforming this country into a non-corrupt one. So, given also your very good economic background and the talents of a CEO, could you possibly tell us where can we raise this 1.5 billion so that we go and do produce a vaccine against corruption in this country?
Of course, I have no answer, you know that, but I cannot give you 400 million, nor can I give you 1.5 billion, but I can give you 2 million.
Wow, that's actually, Daniel, yeah.
Can I, sorry, I thought you were stopping already. Can I ask one follow-up question about the question before? Because you are in the board of PepsiCo as well.
Yes. Now comes a really provocative question.
Can you maybe answer it yourself?
Yes, it is a big concern of the company how to reduce salt and fat and sugar in the food. And if I have made one contribution to that board, it was that they start a research in this area. And they are researching this area, how to find things which can replace some of these ingredients which have a negative effect on health. Yes, and it's a recognized problem, and you're absolutely right.
Well, good. I mean, we have almost a free-wheeling discussion right now, so I'll be
Sorry.
I just realized that actually some of you may know that Daniel was characterized by Financial Times as one of the most prominent top European businessmen of the last 25 years. And I was wondering which contributes to that success. Right now, today, after you answered my question, I know that eloquence is one part of it. And another thing is not only eloquence, but also the contribution, the 2 million which Daniel has mentioned. is actually here. This is the efficiency and of the delivery on the promise. And Novartis will end up in the history of philanthropy in Russia. I will recheck, but to the best of my knowledge, it's the first time when the company transfers from annual support of a professorship to creating an endowed position in public health and gender studies. And we're very thankful for Daniel for initiating this move in the corporate world. We hope others will follow.
I hope so for you too.
Let me finish with one quotation from Daniel, and that is, leadership is about taking ordinary people and making them do extraordinary things with a hand. I know where to go now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.